Mid-afternoon, sun hammered the fairground, pinning every board and nail into place like insects under glass. Heat warped the horizon, turned distant mesas to mirage. Dust hung in the air, so thick it seemed a second sky, lower, browner, harder to breathe. Silas Boone guided his tired gelding through the stock lane, saddle creaking, boots silent in the powder. He had come for salt, cartridges, a spool of wire. Nothing else. Noise rolled over the rails. Auctioneers bark, laughter cracked and empty. The restless ball of half-starved cattle pinned too long. Smell of sweat, old manure, cheap rot gut. Silas kept to the shade of a warped awning, hat brim hiding half his face, the scar along his neck. He planned to watch pay leave. At the far end, where broken wagons and lame ponies fetched pennies, a girl stood alone in a narrow pen. Apache by the cut of her cheekbones, 17 at most. Hair tangled, skin traced with road dust. Bare feet firm on splintered planks, as if pain had forgotten her long ago. A single coil of rope looped one wrist to a post, not tight, only symbolic, yet no one bothered untying it. Men drifted past, eyes sliding over her the way they might over a cracked bucket or a mule too old to pull. Wild someone muttered, "Broke wrong," another spat. No bids. The auctioneer shrugged, wiped brow with red kerchief, tried again, voice louder, throat drier. Silas felt the weight in his pocket. $3 silver, dull with sweat and time. Enough for winter salt and a box of shells, barely. He stepped into the light. Boot heels thudded once on the plank. Conversation faltered, a brief gap in the heat haze. Silas met the auctioneer's stunned grin with a stillness that killed further talk. He lifted the coins, no words, and dropped them one by one into the man's open palm. Metal on callus, sharp as a bell in drought. Silas reached for the rope, loosened the knot. The girl did not flinch, did not lower her stare. Her eyes were dark as river stone under silt, and just as unreadable. For an instant he saw his own reflection there, a man carved down to bone and silence, held together by habit. Not pity, recognition. She stepped out of the pen, rope trailing like a shed skin. Dust swallowed their footprints before anyone thought to laugh. The wagon rumbled west, wheels cutting shallow scars across the plain. Sun bled into the mountains. Long shadows hitchhiked in the wagon bed beside 2 sacks of salt and nothing else. The girl sat on the rear plank, legs folded, stare fixed on the shifting rim of the world. No chains, no voice. At twilight, Silas halted at a dry creek, watered the gelding, offered the canteen. She drank in slow measured swallows, wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. Wind tugged at her hair, lifted dust from her shoulders, carried it into dark. They climbed again, stars pricking the bruise of sky. Ahead, his ranch waited in its cradle of stones. House leaning, barn half-roofed, while nearly dry. A place shaped by silence into something smaller than it once was. He swung down by the porch, lantern light painting boards in brittle gold. She hesitated at the threshold, then crossed it barefoot, Saul silent on the warped pine. He pointed to the spare cot in the corner, clean blanket folded once, never used. She dipped her chin, settled with back to the wall, knees to chest, eyes wide open even in lamplight. Silas poured 1 cup of water, set on the rough table between them. Left it there. Outside, coyotes sang, thin and distant. Inside, 2 breaths timed themselves to the ticking stove. No questions rose. The house, long starved of presence, adjusted its brittle bones around the added weight. Before the lamp died, he glanced up. She was still awake, gazed steady on the flame, as though memorizing how light lives inside glass. He closed his eyes, expecting dreams of cannon flash, smoke, voices that ended in blood. Instead came nothing. Only the steady rustle of wind through cracked shingles and a faint, unfamiliar comfort in the knowledge that another heartbeat shared the same roof. The silver dollars were gone. Salt would wait. Cartridges, too. In their place, silence lingered. Changed, no longer an empty room, but a low fire toward which 2 abandoned souls could drift, cautious and wordless, learning that warmth was still possible. Dawn crawled over the mesas in cold amber. Silas stepped onto the porch, shovel in hand, boots crunching frost. Barn doors hung open, a habit of neglect. Yet inside he found her curled in straw, wrapped in the blanket he'd left on the spare cot. She stirred as horses shifted, eyes tracking him like a doe, sizing distance. No alarm, no greeting. He tipped his hat brim, moved on. Chores unfolded in their tight circle. He broke ice on the trough, hammered a warped hinge, hauled feed in canvas sacks that whispered dust each time they hit the bin. When he returned to the house, the water cup from last night stood empty, cleaned, set upright on the sill. A single river pebble weighed its base, her quiet receipt. Meals stayed simple. Beans, hard bread softened in hot water, coffee stewed dark. At dusk, he carried a tin plate outside, set it on the porch rail, retreated within. Later, he found the plate licked clean, placed exactly where the cup had been, pebble traded for one slender blue jay feather. Nights spread long. Wind rattled tin patches on the roof. Coyotes worked the distant ridge. She slept in the barn, blanket now doubled into a nest under the loft ladder. He drifted to dreamless rest, waking only when old ache in his shoulder pinched. Sometime before dawn each day, he heard her footsteps on hard ground, measured, heading to the pump. A week folded. He rose one morning to find fresh water steaming in the stove kettle, beans soaking, kindling stacked by size on the hearth. She moved outside by the corral, mending a slipped rail with baling wire scavenged from junk piles. Hammer small, rhythm sure, tap, twist, tap. Sun caught dust in her hair. Sweat darkened the torn dress where shoulders met spine. She paused to stretch, gazed sweeping horizon, then returned to wire. When chores called him to south pasture, she followed 15 paces behind, barefoot strides careful of mesquite thorns. A busted gate lay flat where steers had pushed through. He lifted one end, wincing at the pull in old muscle. A second set of hands appeared, slender but firm, helping raise the gate into place. Her breathing steady, face calm, no need for words. They wedged it upright. He hammered staples. She tightened loops with stolen pliers, leaving fence taut. Finished, she stepped back, palms streaked red with creosote. Their eyes met. He nodded once. Wind carried the nod onward. That evening clouds bunched low, threatening rain that never came. He found her crouched by the cook shed, coaxing orange sparks from cedar shavings. Flame caught. She layered larger sticks, built heat slow. Pot set, water, handful of wild onion she'd gathered from washes. He watched from porch steps, arms folded as she stirred in beans, salt, the last scrap of dried hair he'd hunted weeks ago. The smell nudged memory of a wife humming over stew, sound he thought fire had burned away. She ladled half the meal into his tin, half into another she must have found among junk iron. Sat cross-legged near the doorway, shoulders brushing rough frame, but never crossing threshold. Animal distance kept. They ate under the same lintel, quiet except for spoons scraping rim. Stars pricked black velvet. Coyotes answered moon. He carried both tins to the pump, rinsed them, set them by fire. When he turned, she stood holding the kettle. Steam drifted between them, smelling of pine needle tea. She offered the cup. He took it, felt heat soak arthritic joints. She drank second cup, head bowed, eyes half-lidded, a communion of nothing said. Winter crept in behind, lengthening nights. North wind knifed through chinks. He patched windows with feed sacks. She stuffed gaps with straw bound in cloth. Still cold bled into the barn. One frostbit dawn, he strode out carrying the spare cot blanket. She rose from straw, shivering. He draped the blanket across her shoulders, turned to leave. A small hand caught his sleeve, not gripping, just resting. Warmth pulsed through wool, across scar, into marrow. He met her gaze. Night-dark eyes flickered with a quiet thanks no tongue required. He gave a curt nod, walked away before breath turned unsteady. That evening she moved her blanket to the porch alcove, halfway between barn and house. He left the door open a thumb's width, Lamp glow spilled outside, painting boards amber. She sat within its edge, knees hugged, face reflecting the moving flame as though storybooks played across glass. Snow teased but held off. Fence posts, iced each morning, thawed by noon. They hauled hay together, stacked it under patched barn roof. Laughter absent, yet something lighter hovering around shared breath. Sometimes she disappeared to the river, returning with willow bark, wild mint, a catfish still flopping. He cleaned the fish. She seasoned it with crushed sage, meal that tasted of years he thought forever lost. One night, wind bowled tumbleweeds against siding like muted drums. Sleep fractured by old war ghosts, he lurched upright, sweat cold. In doorway, silhouette stood, slender, calm, holding a mug that steamed in lantern glow. She crossed floorboards without sound, set mug on crate beside his cot. Brew smelled of chamomile and juniper. She sat on the floor, back to wall, hands around knees, watching ember light in stove. His heartbeat slowed to match her stillness. He drank. Warmth slid into ribs like oil easing rusted hinge. When morning peeled shadows off walls, she was gone at chores. The mug sat empty but clean. He touched rim, felt pulse beneath skin steady, unfamiliar. That afternoon, he carved a small figure from cedar scrap. Wind scraped hard across the roof, pushing sleet under loose shingles. Inside, the stove glowed low. Every board in the ranch house remembered war and winter in the same creek. Silas dozed in his cot, blanket heavy against scar-pulled skin. Dreams broke open, cannon thunder, smoke rolling through cottonwoods, Mary's voice swallowed in the roar. He jerked awake, breath knotted, vision swimming. Room lay dark except for ember light licking walls. A shape crouched beside the stove. Naya, knees drawn to chest, eyes reflecting coals. She carried no lamp, only the steady hush of presence. At his first ragged inhale, she turned, lifted a small tin kettle to the heat, tapped dried leaves into the water. Willow bark, mint, a curl of something red, desert sumac perhaps. Steam rose fast, silvering her hair and the rafters overhead. Silas swung his legs over the cot, boots scraping floor. The scar on his shoulder sang with old fire. His palm shook against his thigh. Naya poured the brew into Mary's chipped enamel mug, wrapped cloth around the handle, crossed a few steps. She didn't touch him, set the mug on an upturned crate between cot and stove, then sat on her heels, waiting as though night itself were listening for a reply. He stared at the swirl, green gold with a copper drift. Steam carried pine, and something sweet that reminded him of creek banks before bullets. Hands still unsteady, he lifted the mug. First sip scorched tongue, second cooled. Bitterness folded into warmth that spread down his throat, across ribs, into the hollow place grief had carved. Breath steadied. Wind rattled the shutters once, then settled. Naya unfolded from her crouch, moved to the doorway, but lingered, bare feet grazing board seam. Moonlight framed her silhouette, picking silver from hair ends, tracing the mended tears in her dress. She raised one hand, touched her chest, heart, and then the wall beside the cot, low, near the floor. Not question, not plea. Permission. Silas nodded. She laid her blanket on the plank floor at the foot of his bed, curled onto it, back to stove heat. He banked the coals, dumped ash, added one split oak. Flame climbed, throwing orange ribs across ceiling. Cot springs groaned as he lay down. Floorboards answered with softer sigh when she settled. Two breaths synced in the dim, his slow, rebuilding, hers light, unbroken. Outside, sleet shifted to snow, drumming softer now, then nothing, just the hush of flakes piling against clapboards. Hours slid, and nightmares did not return. He drifted surface light, each shift of fire casting new shadows on the wall. Patterns of fence rails, sunflower stems, a coyote carved from cedar. Peace felt strange on his tongue, but did not choke. Just before dawn, kettle tapped iron. She placed it back to warm. He rose, poured water, found the herb pouch beside mug, tied with a strip of buckskin. Inside, neat bundles, willow, sumac, tiny twist of sweetgrass. Enough for many nights. He glanced down. Naya slept still, one hand under cheek, fingers curled like a small promise. Snowlight slipped through window crack, gilding the braid of sweetgrass he had nailed above the door. It swayed in draft, scent blooming, summer waiting under cold. Silas pulled his coat, stepped outside. Sky glowed blue steel. Snow lay thin. Animal tracks a clean calligraphy across yard. Rabbit, maybe fox. He filled lungs. Air tasted crisp, without the bite of burning towns. Only cedar smoke and distant sage. When he returned, she sat by the stove, stoking coals. He pressed palm to his chest, where warmth lingered beneath skin. She saw, nodded once, acknowledged cure, not triumph. He fetched the kettle, poured 2 mugs this time, handed one to her. She cradled it, steamed fingertips, raised the rim toward him, silent toast. In that simple mirroring, he felt the house gain another beam, unseen but strong, spanning the room from his pulse to hers. Outside, dawn unfurled pale pink across snow. Inside, 2 cups cooled side by side on crate wood, their steam mingling, ghosting upward into a single braid that vanished near the rafters, leaving behind air warmer than any words they might have risked. White dust crawled over the plains, erasing fences, hills, horizon. Snow drove sideways, needles slanting sharp out of north wind that smelled of empty mountains. By mid-afternoon, the ranch was a single dark, knot in a sheet of pale noise. Creak of shutter, groan of maple tree. The house sang under strain but held. Silas stacked wood as high as the stove door would swallow, heat roaring until stovepipe rang like a faint iron bell. Outside, cattle bawled, sound blown thin, almost brittle. He tugged coat to his chin, loaded fresh lantern oil, and stepped onto the porch. Naya met him there, face half hidden in a wool scarf she'd sewn from grain sacks and cedar bark. She pointed toward the lower pasture, gray blots pacing the drift. Wolves, drawn by smell of fear and thin ribs beef. Silas's hand hovered over the rifle leaning inside the doorway. Old instinct snapped awake, but the scar on his shoulder still ached from the poacher night. A different defense called. Naya tapped his forearm, then gestured, circle, flame. He understood, fire beats fangs. They moved wordless. In the cook shed, she gathered dried sage and prickly pear pads, their skins cured stiff like leather. He fetched kerosene, straw, a rusted pitchfork. Snow slammed the roof like surf on cliffs. Lantern light quivered. At the pen, cattle pressed to the lee side, eyes wide moons. Between fence rails, wolf shapes drifted 3, maybe 5, paws silent on powder, breath fogging. Naya stabbed pads on a forked tines, doused them, tossed a match. The torch held up, blue core licking orange edges. She handed it to Silas, fashioning another. They circled opposite directions, torches high. Wind bent flames sideways. Sparks hissed out before they touched ground. Silas thrust his torch over the rail, close enough to taste scorched fir scent. A growl rippled. Yellow eyes flashed. Naya's torch answered across the pen, shadows jumping fence boards like ghosts. Wolves paced, uncertain. Snow thickened, covering their paw prints even as they made them, erasing intent. One lunged, snap of teeth against cold rail. Silas swung fiery tines down, wood cracking a post in shower of embers. Flame burst bigger. Wolf dropped back, trot shifting to retreat. Another shape flanked near the feed shed. Naya stepped between, lifted her torch and a fistful of sage. She scattered dried leaves into flame. Smoke roared rich and bitter. Wind caught the plume, lashed it across the wolf's muzzle. Stinging, sacred, ancient. It whined, turned, melted into the night. Minutes stretched, torches shrinking to char. Wind finally changed direction, south now warmer. Silence returned, broken only by cattle's shaky lowing. They planted the smoking stubs upright in snow, marking a boundary. Inside the pen, animals lifted heads, steam curling from nostrils, calm seeping back like thaw water. Back in the house, Silas stripped off gloves stiff with ice, set kettle to warm. Naya unwrapped scarf, cheeks raw crimson, eyes shining not with victory, but from the shared rush of necessity answered. He poured 2 tin mugs of wheat coffee, slid one toward her. She took it, let the rim kiss split lips, breathed steam deep, medicine beyond herbs. Fire dimmed to coals. She rose, fetched an old oilskin coat he rarely wore, spread it near the stove. Blanket followed. Without question, she laid her own near it, 2 nests side by side on creaking floorboards. Her eyes asked nothing. His heart answered anyway. He banked the stove, turned lamp low. Snow eased, tapping windows soft as moth wings. They lay close enough to share warmth, far enough for breath to cool before mingling. Between them on the floor, she set a sliver of charred sage, still fragrant, symbol of night survived. Silas traced its outline with rough fingertip, then fell asleep to the even cadence of 2 lungs working, not alone, against winter's hush. Dawn rose pearl gray, wind spent. Outside, drifts carved clean curve along the fence, torch stubs black against white. Wolf tracks led away, dissolved into distance. Naya lit a new fire, stirred oats with honey she'd hidden since autumn. Silas stepped onto the porch. Silence outside felt changed, respectful, almost tender. He turned back in, caught her gaze. For the first time, her mouth curved upward, small, sure. He answered with his own reluctant smile, one corner of his face creasing deeper than the scar. There were only 2 tin spoons. She handed him one, the metal warm from her palm. Between spoonfuls, she drew a single symbol in the ash at the hearth's edge, a circle ringed by tiny arrows pointing inward, together defended. He gripped her wrist gently, left his print beside hers. Palm down, fingers spread, open, staying. Outside, icicles dripped. Inside, the house breathed slow and full, its walls no longer merely standing but sheltering, holding a promise shaped by torchlight and shared quiet.